1, 2. Here's another. 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. You should. 1, 2. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay. Sitting down. Oh, Richard was coming.
You know, Bakari, I think I actually might need that fan. Did they say that there were two fans that they could bring another one over to this side?
What O's was like you
Yes,
about to
thank you.
sing.
I know how to test the mic.
Going into it.
Pick it up, bring it to your mouth.
So much. I grew up, I can actually talk loud in a church.
It's for the live stream.
Okay, for the live stream more. Got it. So, so
Right.
yeah, so Peter has just retired.
I guess that's good too.
Still traveling.
Not as much, but
Mic is a little sensitive.
Prettier tablecloths. Real pretty. Different from this one.
just constant too.
Are you okay working?
No, until we sort of launched this campaign to endow these grassroots organizations, which to me shifts the way philanthropy does business.
They put them in that 16 passenger van.
More energy. So my contract
Martin, you know, she has cancer. Miss Carol, she has lung cancer. Yes.
For 3 seconds or hold for 3 seconds.
It seems loud.
Yeah, they're all very quite sensitive.
what you're doing now, what you just
No, I'm not.
I saw what you sent me around.
I'm getting
I
ready.
didn't mean to. I sat right on the leg. I didn't mean to. I'm sitting right on the leg.
I was saying this is the audience I am.
I was like,
Right. No. It was more about the
oh, two.
No, because you need to stay there. We're out. Well, I suppose I could put it.
And it's all been Frost members.
and like friends and family.
It's Dominique.
He comes and plays golf.
Yeah, we're gonna just, thank you. We're not quite ready. Almost. Thank you.
So I have to face all the speakers. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Holmes Ward. I am the clerk of the Union Chapel Education and Cultural Institute. For those of you that have not joined us on one of these afternoons, let me give you a very brief introduction about what we're all about. Born out of a vision to find additional ways for Union Chapel to serve Martha's Vineyard during the age of Obama, yes, summer visitors to Oak Bluffs and surrounding communities expressed a need to expand their reach beyond social activities around the issues of the day, and Islanders began to ask if Union Chapel could be a home for that kind of expanded activity, and so the speaker series was developed. Over time, these, what we like to call after the beach and before cocktails gatherings, morphed into the Union Chapel Education and Cultural Institute. All of our events are free and open to the public. And let me introduce now the president of the Union Chapel Education, Richard Taylor.
They just throw these titles around. You know when this stuff happens, you know who's getting all the hard work done. I'm just the front man.
No,
But anyway, give Karen a hand. She's really been my partner. She's got an award-winning television program that she has and produces, Channel 5 here, so we're happy to have her. I wanted to just take a minute and tell you that starting this year, we named these public forums after our dear friend Charles Ogletree. And, you know, I always get a little emotional. Charles is a beautiful brother and constitutional scholar, academic author, and fighter for justice. And he actually, as you know, was the founder of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute at Harvard Law School and went down with dementia. Left the Vineyard, left Cambridge, went down to Maryland where he has family, but he's hanging in. And when I told Pam that we named it after him, she really appreciated it. So give a hand for Charles, please. I'm excited about this particular forum because it's different and it's timely. We started some years, maybe as many as 5 or 6 years ago, on the Vineyard dealing with black art, which was new and novel. And that's really grown over the last half dozen years. So my own vision with this panel, who Karen's going to introduce later, it's a stellar panel, is that over time we build and build so that they will come to the Vineyard and make philanthropic announcements. They'll be giving out resources, making awards, recognizing people. Someone's got to help me with the name, but there was a woman who had a fairly menial job in Mississippi. She saved money over the years. Give me your name, please.
McCarty.
Okay. And she got an honorary degree from Harvard University because she had saved and saved and saved and made a philanthropic award for scholarships of people from her own Mississippi. There's so many examples of philanthropy that don't deal with multimillionaires or billionaires. And that is also part of the story here. So I'm delighted that this panel took the time to come. Again, Karen's going to introduce them, but we hope over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, we can really begin to build this so that the Vineyard becomes a place where philanthropy is not just something that's buzzed around and just talked about in a melancholy way, in a cavalier way, but something very serious and substantial. I wanted to thank my friend Jill Conway here, who's been with us, Sandra Conway, who's been with us, very helpful on this and putting this together. Give Sandra a hand, please. She's been very helpful. She helped me organize. I tell you what happened, tell you exactly what happened. We were at a fundraiser in West Chop for Stephen Reed, the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama, last year. Or was it 2 years ago? I forget. Anyway, we were at the party. And she came to me and said, Richard, I think this could be a good topic. We chatted about it, spent some time talking about it, and she helped curate it. So please give her another hand. She's been great, down with the plan. So Karen, come back up and introduce the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. This is the 4th in our series this summer. We did one earlier in the year, supported by Boston University, Black Perspectives in the Media. We had one with Nicole Hannah-Jones, Race and American History, supported by my company, Hearst Television. Yesterday, we did a seminar on voting rights. The struggle continues with Ayanna Presley and Michael Curry, who is a friend of Mr. Sellers, a national board member of the NAACP. And then we did something new this year with the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. We supported and sponsored a talkback with Kathy Hughes and former Attorney General Eric Holder. Well, today, our Charles Ogletree Public Forum series is called Black Philanthropy, Catalyzing Community Change for Us and by Us. And one of the goals among many today is to lift up defining characteristics of Black philanthropy, as well as share stories of celebrated and unsung Black philanthropists throughout American history. Richard just gave us a great example a moment ago. First, I'd like to introduce our panel. Aisha Alexander Young from the Giving Gap exists to advance racial equity in giving and mobilize positive action for Black lives by connecting people to causes that they care about. Makiba McCreary from the New Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund is a coalition of Black and brown executives in Massachusetts who've come together to leverage our individual and collective power to work with community organizations and coalitions to address and eliminate systemic racism and racial equity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Valida Fullwood from the new generation of African American philanthropists is a philanthropic collective inspiring action through the power of Black philanthropy, and they've been doing so since 2006. John Jackson from the Schott Foundation for Public Education is a national public fund that fuels racial and educational justice movements and promotes equity and opportunity in public education. Vi Lyles from the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative, MREI, which aims for the city of Charlotte to set the standard as an American city for achieving racial equity, social justice, economic opportunity, and upward mobility through transformational public-private partnerships. And I am so thrilled today that we have as our guest moderator, Bakari Sellers. I've had the pleasure to have Bakari as a featured guest on my CityLine program. Let me tell you just a bit about him. Bakari is an attorney, he's a political commentator, and a politician. He served in the South Carolina House of Representatives from 2006 to 2014, at the time becoming the youngest African-American elected official in the country at only age 22. Isn't that phenomenal? It's phenomenal. He's got a lot of experience under his belt now, and you can also see him on CNN. He has a book out that I just love, and this is why he was on our CityLine program, talking about his new book, Who Are Your People? It's children's literature, and I'm going to let Bakari tell you about that. And with that, Bakari, welcome, and our panelists, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Well, oh, there we go. I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. You laughed way too hard over there. Where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad would always tell me the 2 most important words in the English language, which kind of tie into what we're talking about today, are the words thank you. And they're not nearly said enough. And so I just want to say thank you to the organizers of this amazing panel that we have here today. Thank you to these panelists. And thank you to Charles Ogletree. Weirdly enough, I have a Charles Ogletree story. When I graduated from Morehouse, I was 20 years old. And I was deciding where I was going to go to law school. And my choices were Harvard, Emory, and the University of South Carolina. And my father said, you need to talk to my good friend, Charles Ogletree. And I said, okay. I said, but I was in Atlanta at 16 years old, so my GPA was, we won't talk about it. But I tested well. And Charles Ogletree made it his mission to get me into Harvard Law School. Now, I chose the University of South Carolina because they don't have sweet tea and they don't have grits up here. But regardless, Charles Ogletree was always a good family friend, and so it's an honor to be here at a symposium and panel in his honor. The last thing is, when I was asked to do a panel on philanthropy, asked why, I'm still paying student loans. So the philanthropy part is still in my near future, I would hope. But they asked me to be the moderator, and I have some amazing people here. And so one of the first things I wanted to do is toss it to my now favorite mayor, because Steve Benjamin has now retired, my favorite mayor, Mayor Vi Lyles, and just talk about, I want everybody to spend, I know we got a brief introduction of who you are and what you do, but talk about the 50,000-foot view of Black philanthropy, and then we'll dig down a little deeper. But I want people to get an opportunity to get to know you just a little bit better, and we'll start with Mayor Lyles.
So thank you. I have the honor of having my daughter on this panel with me. And that's probably the biggest gift that I can give to you, because she's really good at this work that she does around racial equity, around philanthropy, and she actually was the first person in our family to talk about philanthropy. I usually called it tithing. You know, that's what we did. And when you grow up where I grew up, not too far from Denmark, we stayed in the state capital. He was in the country, and we were people of faith and had a family church. And what did you do? Everybody tithed, and we thought that was philanthropy, because at the time in the Black church, that's where everyone got their support, where people came with problems, and problems were solved through the community and the congregations that led them. And so I'm proud to say that that church still exists today, and I have 5 brothers, and they all go every Sunday. So I'm just really proud to say that I serve as mayor of the city of Charlotte, the 15th largest city in the country, almost 900,000 people. But that doesn't make us a great place to be. It's only a great place to be when we create the opportunities for people to have greatness in their own right. And that's what this panel is about for us today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend, Valeda Fullwood, who also encourages me as mayor to be better at what I do in terms of philanthropy.
And before we go to Valeda, she said that she was the mayor of the 14th largest city in the United States, and ain't none of y'all clapped. So I don't know where y'all from, but I think, I was like, I don't know who these people are we talking in front of. But it's really difficult to be a Black woman in politics and be the mayor. And so I want to make sure that down south we say you got to give people their flowers while they living. Amen? Amen. Okay, Valeda.
Thanks, Vi. And to your point, it's often said that the Black church was the first community foundation. And so we have a long history of giving in Black communities. I know I was inspired through the giving in my church, in my community, kinship giving in my family. I've been a benefactor and a beneficiary of Black philanthropy. And as mentioned earlier, I'm part of a philanthropic collective and coming together with other Black people to pool our funds, our charitable dollars, to give back, to make grants to Black-led, Black-founded nonprofits in our community has been really important. We've been at it for 16 years. I've learned a lot over the years. I was inspired to write a book about Black philanthropy, and along the way learned that at least when I say Black philanthropy, it's more than just Black people writing checks. It really speaks to a set of values, a mindset, a culture, and rich traditions that exist in African American communities everywhere, and African descendant communities everywhere. And that's what today's conversation is about, and how we can be even more thoughtful and focused and strategic in our giving so we have greater impact in our communities.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Alexander Young. I am Vilal's daughter. That's one of the accolades I guess I have. I've been a big fan and supporter of her all my life since birth. But as she stated, we didn't grow up talking about philanthropy. You know, we went to church. I knew that you paid your tithes, but I hadn't really heard of philanthropy really before growing up. And then I started working in local government, and I started working on public-private partnerships. And there were all of these families and people that I knew and kind of grew up with in private schools, and their families had foundations named after them. And I thought it was the most curious and interesting thing. And so just a little quick story. At that time, you know, I was like, how do you get a foundation with your name on it? Like, what does that mean, and how do you do that? And my mother is the most giving person I know. She doesn't have millions upon millions of dollars, but I know that she is the most giving person, so she deserves a foundation in her name. And so one of the things that I did, the first thing that I did in philanthropy ever in before my career, for her 50th birthday, I did some research.
Last year.
We won't talk about how many years ago it was, because then you'll do the math and figure out how old I am. But for her 50th birthday, I did some research on the community foundation, the Foundation for Carolinas in Charlotte, and learned how can you open up a foundation in your family's name. And it turned out you needed $10,000. The city of Charlotte did not pay me enough to raise $10,000, but I went around to all her friends and all her family, all of our family, and all of the people that she had done so many wonderful things for across my life, and raised $10,000, and we now have our own family foundation and the Foundation for Carolinas. And so I bring that story up just to Richard's original point that we are all philanthropists. We all can be philanthropists, and it's one of our most time-honored traditions as Black people and in Black communities, because really it was the only way, because public systems in the origination of this country were not built to take care of Black folks. And so we had to build our own philanthropic systems to be able to take care of one another, and it doesn't take a lot to do it. I now do it every single day. I've worked for very large foundations, specifically working on racial equity strategies and racial justice strategies, and funneling dollars through philanthropic institutions to organizations that are doing incredible work to ensure racial justice. I now lead the Giving Gap, which is an organization that helps all of you all be philanthropists. You know, there's a lot of Black-founded and Black-led organizations across the country that do incredible work, but they only receive a fraction of the percent of the $400 billion that is donated to charity every single year. And the work that we do helps you learn about and identify those Black organizations so you may support them through your individual philanthropy.
So interesting. Is this on? Is this respond? Okay. I'm just realizing that actually I did not grow up knowing even what the word philanthropy was. I knew what debt was. I knew how to take stuff to the pawn shop and make sure that we, could get caught up. I knew what it meant to be generous. And so I grew up in a household where, people would often show up in the third bedroom. I remember my father one time gave away my favorite 8-track. It was Stevie Wonder's and She Lovely. I probably still have not forgiven him for that. But he did it because somebody said that they loved it. And he said, okay, here. And so it must have sort of sunk in. I know that when my son was 5 or 6 years old, I used to worry that he had access to so much more than I did, and I didn't know how I was going to teach him about this idea of generosity. Still did not think of it as much as about philanthropy. And so I told him that we were going to have philanthropy Sundays, and he had to take the brown paper bag around the house and pick 5 things that he was going to give away. And that's really what it looked like for me. Fast forward, here I am with the privilege of leading a fund that was founded by 19 Black and brown executives, 2 of whom I give my shout out to are in the room, Pam and Damon, who were courageous and fierce and came together and raised $30 million in less than 18 months in the city of Boston to make sure that Black and brown nonprofit leaders across the Commonwealth were able to start to level up that playing field a little bit of that 1% of community foundation dollars that go to Black and brown organizations as opposed to what goes to white organizations. And really unapologetic about that. So it is full circle, and I will say that I think my parents are watching this live stream, and when I get home, thank you very much. I'm sure my father is going to wonder why I have not started a foundation for him. So I will be back in touch with you.
Every parent is in here like looking at their child.
One of my favorite people, John.
Sure. John Jackson, it's a pleasure to be here. President of the Schott Foundation for Public Education. Schott is a foundation that has been around for the past 30 years. This year we're celebrating or commemorating our 30th anniversary, that is really focused on resourcing black and brown-led organizations to achieve the type of capacity necessary towards racial equity and racial justice to provide students an opportunity to learn. I say all of that because when we think about the billions of dollars that exists within the philanthropic sector, and primarily within the institutional foundations, less than 6% of those resources are dedicated to racial equity and racial justice. One thing we all know that we've been fighting for racial equity and racial justice for centuries, and this isn't a battle that is going away. So part of my challenge and part of our journey at the foundation is how do we build the sustained capacity of people who are closest to the challenges and closest to the solutions in order to protect our democracy and achieve racial equity and racial justice. You know, I have a Charles Ogletree story also. Charles was a dear friend, and when I was at Harvard, he was a mentor. After that, we would meet on Monday nights to watch Monday Night Football together. And he was a Cowboys fan, and I was a Bears fan. So in between debating...
That sounds like miserable football with those.
That's right. Oh. But in between debating, we would talk about Supreme Court cases, and we would talk about legislation moving forward. And he knew I wasn't a practicing attorney. I am an attorney, but he was making for me that connective tissue between the work that I was doing in philanthropy and how we had to ensure that there was capacity on the ground so that those lawsuits would have a win behind their sale. And so, Richard, I thank you all for naming this series after Charles Ogletree, because it is very appropriate to his work, and it outlines for us the work that remains to be done.
So let's start with this, because my father is a great man. He is somebody who helped found this little small fledgling civil rights organization in Raleigh, North Carolina, called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right? And but you remember when they used to mail credit cards to you, like to your actual house? The way my daddy taught me about finances and credit, et cetera, was he would cut it up in front of us, and he would say that if you don't have the money to get it, you should never get it. So financial literacy wasn't necessarily our thing. And we're talking about philanthropy in a way that seems to be something that we need to break down just a little bit. So for the three people in the middle, Aisha Makiba and Valeda, I would like for you to tell us what black philanthropy is and what it's not. Because when you hear the terms black philanthropy, a lot of people think Robert Smith. And I love Robert Smith, but it's more than that. So let's talk about the nuances of what it is and what it is not. Valeda?
Sure. As I mentioned, a lot of people in the black community don't call their generosity and giving philanthropy. We just do what we do. We might call it giving back, but part of my work is bridging that. I don't want to relinquish our philanthropy by doing away with the word. I go back to the root meaning of the word philanthropy, reclaiming it, which is love of humankind. I think somewhere along the way it got hijacked to have a very myopic focus on only how many zeros behind the dollar signs, but when we bring it back to love and love of community, love of one another, we really get to the root, and I think it speaks to what black philanthropy specifically means. And for me, there are 4 characterizing aspects of black philanthropy. It's not exclusive to the black community, but it does help define black philanthropy. 1, the sense of mutuality in our giving, seeing ourselves and others, or what some people refer to as Ubuntu, from a South African term of I am because you are, and recognizing humanity in other people. So that sense of mutuality, the fact that we give more than just money. We bring our full selves oftentimes. Yes, we may write a check, but we also, lift each other up, pat each other on the back, open up opportunities, and give in a variety of ways beyond monetary only. It's also oftentimes, but not always, sacrificial. So our giving isn't necessarily out of abundance, but we find a way, out of no way sometimes, to help one another and be supportive of one another. And then also the social justice lens that we bring to our giving, and really to breaking down barriers and evening playing fields for one another and creating opportunities and access for one another. So those 4 elements helped define Black philanthropy for me.
Thank you, Valeda. I'll go back to what I said in my intro a bit, that philanthropy is one of our most time-honored traditions as a Black community. We don't think about it in that way, but it most certainly is. One of the first mutual aid philanthropic societies that we know of on record in history is the Free African Society. That was Philadelphia area, not too far from here. And it was one that helped newly freed, formerly enslaved folks make sure that they were set up and had the dollars and the clothing and the shelter that they needed to survive and thrive. And so it's just something that we have always done, and it's something that I want us to reclaim and be able to say, like, no, we are philanthropic. We are philanthropic people by nature. But it is very important to realize, I think, when most of us close our eyes and picture a philanthropist, we do picture Robert Smith or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. But all of those zeros is not what makes philanthropy. It's the love of humanity, it's the love of people, it's the love of community, and wanting to give of what you have so others may thrive. And so I think that's what really defines Black philanthropy and philanthropy in general, and that's what we need to get back to. And it doesn't take a certain amount of resources to become philanthropic. You are being philanthropic when you give $5 or if you give $5 million. It does take a certain amount of intentionality to be able to say that I want to support this community for this purpose, whether it's giving $5 every month or building towards $5 million as a community, as a fund. And so there's many ways to be able to do it, but it is our tradition and something for us to reclaim.
I think I will approach this from a different lens, because I say yes to everything that was just shared, but the new Commonwealth Fund has 81 nonprofit leaders in its portfolio right now across the Commonwealth. And if you asked them what Black philanthropy was, they would say, it isn't. It doesn't exist. They would say that that philanthropy for them is a construct that was created to protect white wealth. And it's done a really good job of doing that. And so when I get a chance to be in the room with them, part of the challenge is, right, deconstructing this power differential that even as a Black woman, I can't shake. I walk in and I have the resources. And so immediately a dance starts. You know, I think there's a real requirement on our part as leaders of color in these spaces to make sure that we're being very, very careful about how we're both being generous, advancing investments into Black and brown leaders across this country, but also thinking about the language that we are just sort of co-opting and adopting without stopping and saying, maybe there's an opportunity for us to deconstruct that and start clean and get back to the language that you know is being used here about what it should be. And so I think that's really important. It's just something that I'll lift up probably a few more times, the idea that we have inherited a model of generosity that actually is not very generous at all.
Absolutely.
Dr. Jackson and Mayor Lyles, you two are uniquely situated to talk about the next question, which is philanthropy in this public sphere. As mayor and what you do with public education, talk about how you all see Black philanthropy and how you make sure that you meet those metrics and goals of equity, inclusion, et cetera, in your daily task.
Well, I think it's not about the zeros, and it's about the zeros, in that Black and brown people control a lot of zeros in this country right now. We represent a lot of organizations, a lot of foundations, and if we're going to have access to the money, we have to make sure that we're leveraging those dollars to bring about systemic change. So it's not just about, even if it's through the church, it's not just about the building fund. It's about building the democracy within the local community, and how can we leverage those resources to do just that. I think we all know, regardless of the philanthropic organization, whether you're talking the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation, philanthropy as a whole doesn't have enough money to solve our racial equity and racial justice challenges. So our best business model is to leverage our private dollars to get a larger public investment. How can we use those dollars to make sure that the dollars that are flowing through our cities and our states are dedicated toward reducing racial disparities, achieving equity, and that's where advocacy comes in, and that's why there's an importance in ensuring that those grassroots organizations that are doing the advocacy work have the resources necessary to do it and do it well, because ultimately they're going to put pressure on the types of public-private partnerships that can bring the type of systemic change that we want. And Mayor Lyles, you sort of led an effort to build one of those public-private partnerships in Charlotte.
That's true, but I also want to reflect upon what the folks that work in this area really have taught me. How many of us think about paying our property taxes as philanthropy?
I think of it more as a robbery.
Yeah. I think that's a fair statement too, because many people of color paid taxes for many, many years and didn't get the proportionality of their taxes for services in their community. And Charlotte's just a small example of it. I tell people we've got this wealthy neighborhood, big golf course, houses over 500 or 7 to 7 million. And the bridge to that neighborhood got voted on by black people voting for bonds. Because in our community, we vote. In Charlotte, we vote. So a bond referendum doesn't pass without black people. And these communities that had the infrastructure, early in the 1970s, I knew that sidewalks and storm drainage were not being built in the black community in our city, because I worked in the city and I actually did this kind of work. And I knew the disparities existed. So what I say is that the thing that we have to do right now is figure out how to redress those years of those taxes that you paid into that you didn't get your fair share. Sandra and I have this conversation a lot about wealth. I mean, the only reason that many people that are wealthy today is because we gave our free labor as black people for many, many years. So the other day I was doing this radio show and the guy says, well, the John Locke Society says this, this, and this. And I said, well, where were they when they was talking about redlining? Where were they when they talked about you can't walk into a bank and get a loan? So, well, don't talk to me about John Locke Society today, because they didn't show up when they were needed to show up to say things need to be equal. So equality is a major factor in what we have to do in government. So like efforts around this really was, as Nikita said, I was in the room. We have a group of wealthy leaders in Charlotte, and they meet every month and they talk about what the city ought to be and how they're going to grow and who's going to get the next big gift and things like that. And I was in the room and I said to them, you know, if Johnson C. Smith, our only HBCU, fails, I don't want to be the mayor sitting here when it does that. So we made a decision, and now Johnson C. Smith, a small Presbyterian school, has $80 million to thrive. I didn't want a survivor. You know, you can give a couple of scholarships and feel good about yourself, but if that school during COVID had nobody coming, you know what a black college is like when nobody's paying tuition or getting student loans. So we changed that dynamic. But the being in the room and the need for this change, I had to go to a lot of people's houses that were about the size of this church. And I'd have to sit there and they'd tell me the business rationale for it and that they needed to meet everybody and everybody needed to be graded up and all this. And I was like, what world do you live in? Because it's not the world that people that are at Johnson C. Smith are living in. They're trying to figure out how to get the mold off the shower doors. So when I started talking about it, I don't think it was really philanthropy. It was a little bit of anger, actually. It was a little bit about the recognition of how this country wants to change the way that we talk about our history and make everybody start off at the same level playing field. And that's just not going to happen. And it's not something that we can do in Charlotte. We're only 30% of Charlotte's population. But I want you to know, we have 7 African-American CEOs that have my back. I can't ask for anything better than that. Lowe's, EY, just both hospital systems, all of these And these men, they're not any women, so we need to
I was
figure
about
that
to say,
out.
that was all seven
I'm
argument.
working on it, I'm working on it. But these men, they came up through the whole history that we've been talking about here today. So they're gonna have the back of the Mayor's Racial Equity Fund. So we funded Johnson C. Smith University. We funded corridors that were left behind in our black communities where people didn't have the ability to get a loan or they were redlined in their housing situation. We also funded the idea of how do we actually change the C-suite and the boardrooms of the corporations that are headquartered in Charlotte, Honeywell, Bank of America, all of these places, to say every year you will report annually on the number of black people in your organization that got promoted and were able to begin to make those steps to that level of those six-figure incomes that you guys around this room that I was in are making now. So I appreciate the opportunity to serve as mayor during this time. I also appreciate the wealth of knowledge that we have about ourselves now, that we can say these things openly at the table and people get it. So I don't want you to think everybody's bad in Charlotte. All those CEOs, they're not, they just don't see us enough. And I want everyone in my city to be seen. Thank you.
Beautiful. You know, one of the things I joked about was having student loans and not being able to start philanthropy, which was more in jest than anything. So one of the questions that I have for this entire group, and whomever wants to go first, please do, is how do individuals begin that journey? How do they begin their philanthropy journey? Because a lot of people feel that it's unattainable, it's unreachable, it's something that can't be done. I just gave $100,000 to Morehouse, but I did not tell my wife before I made the announcement, so I will tell you that you should always involve your spouse before you begin your philanthropic journey. I learned that one. But what are some of the other very tangible things that people can do? And I'm gonna start at the end with Dr. Jackson, and we can work our way this way so that they can begin their philanthropic journey. And also, I mean, if you can, talk about how philanthropy has changed over the years and what differences we're seeing today.
Well, I'll say to start, I think it's as simple as aligning your values. And Valeda talked about the meaning of philanthropy, love for humanity. And when we think about racism, I have a colleague that says racism is nothing more than institutionalized lovelessness. So part of our challenge is how can you locally build the types of loving system where every young person and every family is a part of that loving system. And you sort of have to look around and take your resources into account and look around and see how can you make an impact individually, and even more, where can you add your collective dollar? For many of us, it is the church. For others, it's the workspace. But I would say you might want to start with an individual play and a collective play, and one that it impacts a system. Because yes, it's great to impact a school, but when you know there are hundreds and thousands of young people that are struggling, how can we impact that district? And so, I would just say, start with taking an assessment of where you are and where your resources are already, because chances are you're already engaged in philanthropy, and record how you're doing that, and each year come up with a plan of action for doing so, both individually and collectively.
I would come at it two different ways. One is the genesis of NCF, the New Commonwealth Fund, which is something that was born out of outrage, out of an unwillingness to continue to see the Commonwealth of Massachusetts leaders of color receive so little resources in a time when it was just exacerbated, right? It was impossible to ignore. And these 19 folks stepped outside of their own comfort zones and said to their white CEOs, you know what? We're gonna be leading this effort. You're gonna write a check, and then you're gonna help us raise some more money, and we're gonna make sure that these dollars go to folks who actually know how to solve the problem. We're not gonna second guess that. We're not gonna try to, do a landscape analysis. They're already doing it. and they're struggling, but they have been doing it with very, very little. And so our job is to take the resources we have access to and push it out. So I would start by saying, like, get angry, or get really, excited. There's some incredible human beings out here in all of our worlds that are doing work at small scale. There's a young woman, Ayanna Auberg in Roxbury, Massachusetts, who runs an organization called Sisters Unchained. It's for young people whose parents are incarcerated or have been incarcerated. It's for them. They have fellowship, they come together. I'm not sure she would know what to do with multiple zeros, but she knows what to do with a few of them. And so, we gotta bring that to her. And then we have, folks leading policy and advocacy work at the, high systems level. Leon Smith leading an organization that's focusing on criminal justice and policing reform statewide. And, he needs a lot of resources to get that advocacy done. So that's the first thing, The second thing is, I think we have to remember, and it's been said a few times, but I just want to double down on it, that while it's about the dollar, it's also about, the time and the talent that you can offer. When I am in a room with 4 or 5 nonprofit leaders that I'm working with, and I say to them, I know you want the check, but what else? Right away, nobody's offended. Nobody says, I just want the check. The next thing people say are the following 3 things, hands down. 1, more time with you. I don't get a chance to be in the room with Black leaders, that hardly ever. 2, I want more time with my peers so that I can learn from them, teach them, have fellowship, like just community. And then 3, the tangible stuff, like I need to learn how to read a P&L. I need to understand what it means to file, the right paperwork with the state Attorney General's office so I can hold on to my nonprofit organizational structure. Those are things that I can go out and ask you, or you do this for a living. Would you give us your time? Would you give us your talent? It's all incredibly valuable, and so you can participate in a philanthropic effort just by leveraging the resources around you and bringing those resources to the places where there's a dearth of them.
Absolutely. I would second all that's been said. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at Giving Gap is we want to help people put their money where their morals are, or where they say their morals are, right? And so if we look at how you spend your dollars, or even who you give to, does it say that you care about Black organizations? Does it say that you care about Black communities? And while I second all that's been said about these moments of anger and rage that are catalytic and open us up to creating these organizations and creating Giving Gap was created in response to a trauma. But what I'm most interested in seeing people become more philanthropic around is, what does it look like if your giving wasn't only in response to Black trauma? Does it take seeing a Black man murdered on camera to motivate you to give some dollars to a Black organization? And what would it look like if these organizations were well-resourced all the time? Maybe some of those traumas that we're responding to through our philanthropic dollars wouldn't exist. And so what I'm most interested in is seeing people, you were able to find the time or the resources in response to that trauma. Can you find it in other days, just a regular day, and make that commitment, make that plan, as John said, because maybe some of the traumas that happen would not exist if we were able to become philanthropic on a daily basis.
Thanks, Aisha. Yeah, and building on all the great things that have been offered to help guide your philanthropic journey, I would add 1, review your giving autobiography. Just jot it down. Your first memory of giving or generosity, whether it was as a recipient or as a giver, and how that made you feel, what that experience was like, and then just track other pivotal times in your life where you remember being a giver or receiving something in a period in your life. And in looking at that, think about what had the greatest impact on you and resonates with you today, and let that be a guide to how you give. So I think grounding it in our own personal experiences and things that matter to us is a way to introduce you to your philanthropy or your foray into philanthropy and really owning the practice of philanthropy. And I'm struck by historical accounts, particularly among Black people. Oftentimes it was what we didn't benefit from ourselves or didn't have ourselves that we provide for others. So if it was access to education or literacy, then our forefathers and ancestors and foremothers provided institutions or scholarship funds so people can read. One example, Catherine Ferguson, a Black woman born enslaved, fought, got her freedom, lost her husband and her children to the institution of philanthropy, but pushed on and created New York's first Sunday school, and it provided literacy opportunities in reading the Bible to young children. She sold cakes and baked to help fund her work with young children who were young laborers. And when she died, the New York Times acknowledged her as a philanthropist. So her example, an illiterate woman providing these opportunities for others, is a source of inspiration for me. And there are scores of such stories in Black philanthropy history. Another suggestion is consider being a part of a philanthropic collective or a giving circle. It reduces some of the risks, and you come together with other people to learn about philanthropy, about grant making, about some of the strategies and language of philanthropy, and in pooling your dollars, you can have a greater impact and learn together with relatively limited risk as you might do as an individual launching into your philanthropy. It's been important to me. I've learned so much along the way, and joining with other great people and pooling our dollars and having an impact in our community.
I'm going to say two things. First, I want to thank Sylvester Turner, who is the mayor of Houston, Texas, a good friend, and he arranged a call for about 20 of the Black mayors across this country with about 25 multimillionaire and billionaire Black men and women. In this group, it was a case of wealth. And he introduced us all to them. We had the opportunity to talk. And then the second thing about that gesture that Sylvester made for us is that we realize that across this country, wealth transfers are going to begin to take place pretty quickly. When you start thinking about the demographics, you can actually kind of do data and analysis around this to know that there is going to be a great transfer of wealth in this country pretty soon. So I would say the final thing is do what these women are working towards, to be present and in the room when those decisions are going to be made or when those choices are going to be made, and not be afraid to step up. You don't have to always step up in a way that's nice or not nice. It's just whatever's authentic to you and your community. That's what will work most. But just look and begin to think about that now, because it's going to happen soon, very soon now.
So we are moving to the point of the program where we're going to take questions. Now, when I moderate a lot of programs, for some people, I think they confuse me with Don Lemon. I don't know why. But I have one rule when I moderate programs in the Q&A period, is that your questions have to have question marks. Unless you're above the age of 65 and I can't tell you what to do. However, your questions, please make them out to be questions. As you guys begin to raise your hand or think about your questions, one of the last things that I want to ask this panel, give us some examples of organizations or people who are doing Black philanthropy the right way. Something that we can follow a roadmap outside of the work that you all do. Some other.
I was about to say,
I know you're about to
Giving Gap.
Me, outside of the work that you do. Dr. Jackson, start with you and come down this way.
I think there are a number, I would say, aside from the Shaw Foundation, the Communities for Just Schools Fund, which is a donor collaborative that is working to build the capacity of Black and brown organizations, providing technical assistance, as well as thinking about ways to support the actual people who are doing the work, the healing of the individuals in the work, not just having them do the work, but how can we see them and support them as individuals in their humanity.
Makila?
I'm going to go with New England Blacks in Philanthropy and give Bethia Carter out there a shout out. I think it's really important for us to be able to lift up ways that everybody can have access to being able to give, and that can be at any amount. That can be directed, or it can be something that a group of folks come together and they figure out what they care about collectively. And I think we need more and more of that. So thank you for your work.
There's so many that I would name, but I'll name quickly ADFI. I'm a board member of the Association of Black Foundation Executives, which is doing incredible work with organizations and philanthropic organizations that are committed to change in Black communities and expanding our offerings to individual philanthropists as well. And then the second I would name is Emergent Fund, which is another fund that pools dollars and is able to move them in a rapid response way, mostly to communities and leaders of color that have intersections with other marginalized communities, and they do incredible work.
Right. I would lift up Hill Snowden Foundation, based in D.C. My Giving Circle recently hosted the president of that foundation. It's a white family foundation that has a Black CEO or executive director, and they made a conscious effort to fund racial equity work. And so I've admired their grant making, their commitment to racial equity and support of movements and community organizing and youth organizing, and they've been a guide for me in my work around racial equity and philanthropy.
So I don't have one because my daughter makes all the contributions from my foundation fund. I don't know what I'm doing. She does it all, so I don't really have a name, which is not a bad thing. It's just, it's one thing that she's better at, right?
Just one? Oh.
Just, not just one. Oh, but there are others.
All right, question.
Mr. Sellers, but you shared with us that you gave $100,000 to Morehouse. Just as a practical suggestion to some of us, and without revealing too much of your personal information, and without getting in difficulty with your wife, can you share with us how you were able to give Morehouse $100,000?
Oh, I work hard, travel around the country. I don't know. I just, and they, you know, a lot of times when you give donations, I think people will your intentionality, they will match your intentionality with making it easy for you to give. And so as an HBCU, in my alma mater, that's where I wanted to start. And so we're able to do it. And so I am on the road giving more speeches now to pay for that donation.
I will name one thing really quickly. I did not give $100,000 to Hampton, where I went, but
They don't need it. It's an island. It's a beautiful school. It's fine.
But I will name, I do think as a community that we are learning a lot more about how to improve our financial literacy. We're now talking to our children a lot more about financial planning, wealth planning, and part of that planning should be philanthropic planning. There's been some studies done on what they call 100-year families, so families that are able to retain and grow wealth for over 3 generations. And the families that do that are able to not only focus on building their financial capital, but they focus on building their community and philanthropic capital as well. And so when you're talking to your children about financial planning, wealth planning, creating generational wealth, which we talk about often, if you're not talking about giving back in philanthropy as a part of that, you're likely not building the community capital that is necessary to actually grow wealth.
That's a really good point.
Also, if I can say,
that
check doesn't have to be written up front. It's a commitment, and I've walked around the vineyard. Some of us are already making a $100,000 commitment to Mercedes, $100,000.
You just pay $700 a month.
So we have the money, and I'm not talking about your first car. This is your second car. So we're making these commitments over a 5-year period. It's the same thing. If we can make the commitments to our institutions, it's the same process with no interest.
And to expand about that wealth conversation that you should be having, this ties into some of the other things we have to educate our young people on. One of the things I didn't learn about until 5, 6, 7 years ago was private equity, and finding those opportunities and learning how to invest and doing those things, which kind of go hand in hand. Question?
Great. My name's Liz Clay Roy. I'm from New York, and lead an organization called Generation Citizen. And my question is about...
Yeah, they're dope.
And my question is about long-term versus short-term impact in terms of your institution's giving or your individual giving. We know that there are some who seek anti-democratic outcomes and outcomes to really bring us back 50, 100, 150 years in terms of the progress we've made in this country. And they've been working at that for decades and decades. And I wonder how you think about the choices you make through Black philanthropy around where we need to support our communities in the immediate, right, with the issues around inflation and how we know that's impacting people's dinner table now, and what it means to commit to what it will take us to 20 or 30 or 40 years, be able to build economic power so that we won't be in a situation where every time there's an economic shock to our country, it's Black people who feel it first.
That's a beautiful question. Any one person want to? Yeah, Makee, because
I don't have the only answer, so I hope other folks jump in. But I want to start by just saying, I think what we need to do is be asking you what that impact measurement should look like, or like what success looks like, as opposed to the folks on this side of the table predetermining how we're gonna continue to invest. And so that's just one shift, I think, in the practice that we really should be making. And I just am really excited. We just spent 6 months convening 20 Black and brown nonprofit leaders, paying them for their time to help us, because we're so young, we don't have an impact measurement tool yet, to help us co-design that. And to really say, like, when you walk in the room, after we give you the money, now you tell us what you need in order to be successful, because our responsibility is to make sure that we continue to invest in you in the ways that get you there. That's one thing.
I would like to hear from Dr. Jackson. Main reason is, well, your question was just so timely because, for example, Dobbs didn't happen in a week. It was 40 years in the making, and everybody told us exactly what they were going to do, and then they did it. So it's no surprise to anyone. But you see this deconstruction of many of the systems which we've worked very hard to build, be torn apart. You're seeing that on the front lines because Black kids are punished because of the zip code they're born into. Dr. Jackson, talk about that long-term planning specifically.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we just launched a $30 million endowment campaign where we're going to endow 3 national racial equity and racial justice alliances. Because when you think about it, when we want to protect history, we endow museums. We know that education is going to be needed. We endow colleges and universities, as we should. But we don't endow the organizations that have for years and decades been fighting on the front line to protect our democracy. Our ancestors with pennies changed civil rights policies, and we definitely with dollars should be able to protect our democracy. So we want to endow Black-led organizations are 4 times less likely to have an endowment, 4 times less likely. So it's very important. In philanthropy in and of itself, most foundations, 90% of foundations, survive off of their endowments, and they spend 5% of those. So we're on this campaign. We made our first year threshold of $6 million. We welcome other partners to do it. But think about endowing these grassroots organizations. One final point, the NAACP, people often say that, well, we don't endow organizations because we can't see the impact. It's clear that the impact the NAACP has made over 113 years. And as of 2018, they didn't have an endowment. As of 2018, they didn't have an endowment. Now, they recently launched an endowment campaign, but that's something we should take personal. So went to my board chair, former board chair, Jackie Jenkins Scott, who's here. Happy birthday. And asked if we could launch this campaign, but that's part of our agenda and role for sustainable funding for these organizations.
Great questions, great answers. Anybody else want to chime in before we get to our next question? Okay, next question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ikwasya, and I came from Brooklyn. I'm a writer, filmmaker, and entrepreneur who helps people raise $500,000 to $500,000 to fund their dreams. But this is my question. It's sort of a rhetorical question. I keep asking myself, I thought I started a business, but I started a charity. Because I created my business to fill the gaps of artists and entrepreneurs who want to learn how to raise money through crowdfunding, equity investment, friends and family campaigns. But I realized the paradigm of connecting Black and brown folks to wealth is through whiteness. So when they see me coming with my business, they assume my services are free or some form of charity. And I keep thinking for the past 4 years, all I need to do is find that higher ticket client. But then I finally realized recently, like in the past month, no, the entire paradigm is set up that way. So I guess I sort of want to understand what's the role of someone like me? What's the role of an entrepreneur or people in commerce to help fill some of these gaps that philanthropy doesn't? Because there's a lot of artists and entrepreneurs who feel like they could never fill out for a grant or feel like they can't speak that language, but they want to learn like the basic communications, marketing, and fundraising tactics I use to raise money for myself and help my clients. But I realize that the paradigm is geared towards a way that my business can't even be viable. So it's a question I have for you, like what is the role for people like me, or is there a way that we can also help to start shifting this paradigm?
I want Valeda to start with that one, because
Yeah,
that's a really good question, too.
Yeah, I don't think I'm suited to answer that.
Oh, well, then pass it down. We can
Yeah,
share.
pass it down.
I will
Great,
take a
Makiba.
stab at it. You're right. I think you're speaking a lot of truth. I would say that first of all, there are funds and foundations that are hell of courageous and willing to, and have broken some of those paradigms and are willing to step outside of themselves. And you're in New York, so you should be looking at CERDNA, at the Thriving Cultures program there, led by Javier Torres, who's actually on island. He might even be in here today. But really fantastic approach to investing in arts collaboratives and in artists, and we can talk about more of that later. I'd also say that the second thing is I think that that for the community of creatives, there's such a barrier just in terms of access around just even thinking that there are folks out there, that sometimes there are pockets of dollars that you don't even know about. And so how do you fix that? I mean, that's probably a bigger issue, but it is there, and I think it's probably the onus is more on the funder to start to have those conversations and to get proximate to you all so that they can come to you and say, like, we actually have carved out these resources for you. And then I think the final part is, and this isn't really fair to say, but you know, there's something to be said for sort of stopping the game and saying, like, I'm actually not going to, I'm not going to do this dance with you. I'm going to tell you what I need, and if you're really down for this work, I'm going to hang in there with you, and I'm going to really push you. The folks who I've seen break those molds, have invested some real hard-earned time in holding their ground and saying to a funder or to an investor, this is what I need. I don't need that, I need this. And we have to do a better job of supporting you in being able to hold that ground also.
Makiba's previous position, I should say, was at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
That was a really good question, and you touched on a really unique cultural point as well, which as a lawyer I deal with a lot, which is sometimes white folks' ice is colder than ours, and it drives me up a wall. It drives me a little crazy, and we have to be very cognizant about that in our own communities. Many times we have individuals like yourself who can do the work, who we need to make sure we go to give an opportunity to, and then make sure we compensate you fully for the work that you do. And that's a conversation that we might need to have amongst ourselves. Are you familiar with Versus? Versus, yeah. So Versus was created by Timberland and Swiss Beats. For those of you all who don't know, it's what your kids were doing on Instagram throughout quarantine, and they sold it for about $55 million to a company called Trilla, and they just got into a dispute. And it's nothing but black artists. Swiss Beats and Timberland created this intellectual property, and in this lawsuit, they didn't hire one black lawyer. And so but the reason I bring that up is it's a $28 million lawsuit. 40% of that is, I don't know, I count by thirds usually, but 40% is a good chunk, but that's recycled in our community, it's in our ecosystem. And when we don't think like that, when we don't think about our ecosystem, we don't think about the services that black folk can provide extremely well, then it also limits our giving on the back end because we don't keep those resources in our community. So I had a point there and I finally got to it. Question.
Hi, I'll stay. She just pushed my elbow up, so I guess I'm supposed to stand up.
Stand up and tell us what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, I'm Kahina Van Dyke, and I have a question. First of all, what you just said about Black economy and reinvesting in the community is one of the things that has really been sitting in my spirit this summer, because I feel like it's really important for us to understand that there's no savior coming in on a white horse, right? Like, we have to invest in our businesses, in our communities, in our nonprofits. And as an entrepreneur here on the island, and thank you, because they're walking the walk, because several of these panelists are staying at my hotels, and I appreciate your business. Okay, the Narragansett, she's my marketing expert back here. No, I own the Narragansett House across the street. I own the Inkwell Beach House across from the Inkwell, which used to be Isabel's Beach House. And I own Dunmere by the Sea, which is on the African American Historic Trail. I also have a life off island because somebody needs to finance all this. But my question for you is about this. Do you believe in the pools of funding available for Black philanthropic activities and funding? Is it about going to the large foundations, that the Ford foundations, these huge foundations, and getting racial equity in their giving? Or is there really enough here? You talked about, what did you say? We spend $100,000 investing in Mercedes. Is there enough within the Black community to actually be very serious about philanthropic activities? Because there are tax benefits, there are a whole lot of benefits around giving that are part of a financial plan, a part of a 100-year family plan. What does those pools look like? What is the pool for Black philanthropy, Black on Black philanthropy, and then what are we talking about when we're talking about those big foundations that seem to have just endless funds?
If I may start really quickly, I want to maybe bridge together the work that everyone does across this panel. So, no, in terms of foundation, my work before Giving Gap was in large institutional philanthropy. There are not, as John has said, there are not enough institutional philanthropic dollars to solve the issues that we have as a community and as a country. But those philanthropic dollars are necessary, and I often look at them as an indicator of culture, right? So when I see shifts happening in the halls of philanthropy, it's an indicator that the cultural shift is happening, and the conversations that we are having every day, like the conversation that we're having right now, is influencing philanthropic leaders to think differently about how they need to invest their dollars. So that's a start. But then also, yes, we have tremendous resources, billions of dollars. Our Black dollar is incredibly powerful, and we need to be using it philanthropically to support our nonprofits. We need to be using it to support our businesses. One of the things I did when I worked in the philanthropic sector, and I was brought in to build a racial justice strategy. And I said, we can't build a racial justice strategy for our giving, our grant making, and not have a racial justice strategy for our procurement and contracting. And so what does it look like to make sure that we're spending the dollars that are going out the door, not just as a foundation and giving entity, but as a business entity and a citizen of this community are also supporting racial equity. So we have multiple ways as individuals how you spend your own dollars, how you are influencing how your company or organization spends their dollars to put dollars back into the Black community. But then I would be remiss if I did not say, with my mother and John, that the problems that exist are systemic, right? And they were created intentionally through government divestment. And systems were built to never take care of our community. So that's why the forum that happened yesterday was so important, talking about voting rights and our participation in our public institutions. Philanthropic dollars, we can build our own institutions, we can build new things, but we also have to support strong public institutions that focus on building racial equity and a strong social safety net for all of us.
We'll do one or two more questions.
We have one here, then I'm going to have two over there that have had their hands up.
Okay, and then everybody will have an opportunity to spend some time with the panelists, except for me, because I'm going to begin happy hour as soon as I leave this chapel.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Nakia Washington. I'm from Detroit. I'm a Black Philanthropy scholar, so thank you all for your work in this and the conversation today. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to go back to Makiba, what you said earlier to the question about what Black philanthropy is, and that a lot of people would answer it's not. I will never forget one moment when I posted on social media, I moved back to Detroit from Seattle, about Black philanthropy, and got tore down from a community member, from a sister who said, you know, it's not real. And I'm wondering, we're having these conversations around wealth, and then it seems like social impact or grassroots they're on two different sides of the fence. And I'm really wondering, what do we see for those things being thread together, right? Because then we're talking about another barrier, which is socioeconomic, which is only growing in our community as our wealth grows. So I hope that question was clear. There's a lot there, but I'm wondering, how do we thread the two? Thank you.
Valeda or
Yeah.
Makiba? I think both of you guys are. Valeda, you want to?
Well, yeah, I would say that an opportunity, particularly around Black philanthropy, is more conversations and leading with some of our traditions and values that don't, or historically and traditionally haven't addressed or haven't created those barriers or distinctions across socioeconomic levels. I mean, I think in institutional philanthropy and traditional philanthropy or conventional philanthropy, those dynamics exist and persist, and there is an opportunity in bringing our cultural competence, our relationship and proximity to community, and how we give and engage, and resisting some of the more toxic ways that institutional philanthropy has engaged with our communities in the past, and advancing more of our values and that sense of mutuality in the work provides an opportunity, or presents an opportunity for us to hopefully work more in a unified way across culture.
I have to say, I wake up every day and I go to work in a sector that fundamentally I don't believe should exist, right? Like, it absolutely is, as Makita said, a shelter for wealth, and that's how it's been created. And a lot of that wealth has been created, as my mother said, off of being able to exploit people, often people of color, most often Black people. It's the history of this country that we have to be honest about. And so the way that I look at it is, I fundamentally don't believe this sector should exist. At the same time, while it does, because it's not going away, I'm going to be on this side of the table helping to shift this institution to one that is more focused on justice and equity. And I'm going to change the table. I'm going to build new tables. I'm going to influence the way that this sector works. I got into this sector specifically to change it and to ultimately reach a day where it's not necessary, where it can be dismantled.
And I want to add to what has been said. I think both Aisha and John have talked about this in a way that the whole point is not to have these kinds of programs and interests that we have to do remedial or change. And so if you live in an urban community in this country, if government's not your partner, then you are not really going to actually have the impact, because at some point we have got to figure out that the taxes that are being collected and spent need to be around remediation of some of the very social ills that we have today, and to resolve them in a timely way. Philanthropy has a huge part to play with this, because that's often the conscience of government. Private sector has a huge part to play, because they are the people that are benefiting most from the wealth. But your governmental entities ought to be listening very carefully to what your values are and what the values of that community are. And that will change. That will make a difference. In the program that we've got in the racial equity program, we now have 0% loans for small businesses along the traditionally African American corridors in our city. So when it was time to get that money, how do we set up that pool of money? we of course went right to our banking sector and said, you need to do this. And I tell you, there was this long drawn out process of like, well, can we do it? We have to make a profit. We got to charge something. No, you don't. It's what Aisha said. It's about telling you you don't have to do those things. You can give people money. And yes, it is a risk factor, but it's more risky than most of the projects that they're doing anyway. And in fact, in our community, we could do more.
Yeah, amen to that. That was a pretty powerful statement, Aisha. I mean, I work in a sector that I fundamentally don't think should exist either, and that's pretty.
Here we are, Bakari.
Not CNN, guys. I'm not saying that. I'm referring to being a civil rights lawyer. Yes.
My name is Matalian Conde. So I feel like I'm on the Wendy Williams show because she would never let you take the mic.
That's what they taught us in journalism school. Always hold on to the microphone.
And I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I run a nonprofit called AI for the People. And what we're really interested in is the future of racial justice. So we specifically look at the ways in which algorithmic systems, specifically around democracy, are advancing things like white supremacy. If you look at the Buffalo shooting, Trump coming along, and we've got support from big philanthropy, from the MacArthurs and the Fords, but we've had real problems in educating Black philanthropy because telling a white program officer that social media is an existential threat to our community because it's going to enable white supremacists to find us and then kill us while we shop is really difficult. So my question is, number one, how can new conversations, new threats that are coming onto the horizon, how can we shape Black philanthropy to be looking at these areas? And number two, how can we help legacy institutions who in racial justice do this? We've had some partnerships with the NAACP, for example. But honestly, when we said algorithm, they were like, baby, that ain't nothing but, and then I was like, but look at the people in Buffalo. You know, how can we? So I'm hoping that that question is clear, but it's very difficult to get real money out of white philanthropy with problems that do not impact them in the way that they impact us.
Hopefully Susan won't smack my hand, but we should talk after this. At our last ADVI board meeting, we spent the majority of the meeting talking about the need for digital security for Black organizations, including ADVI and Giving Gap and other, but specifically in the nonprofit space. And one of the things that we talk about often at Giving Gap is, you know, the idea of how Black communities and Black organizations were kind of left out of the conversation when the World Wide Web happened, right? And so we were playing catch up. And so now Web3 is coming. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen to our organizations and our communities again?
I don't know what Web3 is. Somebody had me, I invested in a company in the metaverse. I don't even know where that is, but I hope it works.
Bakari, I just was gonna.
Yeah, go ahead, Makima.
You probably already thought of this, but I'll say it in case it matters. That's the one thing that I think of is sort of the curb cut effect, and how do you help folks understand that you might be talking about an issue that seems really to be narrowly impacting one community, but they're the canary in the mine, right? And the right behind them are you and you and you and you, and so the extra work you have to take on to show that thread is an added burden, but I do believe that often does help folks sort of the light bulb come on, and we have enough evidence of that historically. I like to use the Holocaust typically as a great example that folks seem to be able to grab onto real fast.
I think you also pointed to an area where philanthropy has to shift. The business model for philanthropy for too long has been we have the money and we know the most. And program officers and philanthropic organizations have to understand that we learn and we become better from those who are closest to the challenges, like yourself, and those who are in the communities. They have the solution. So how do we connect our resources to their solutions? And the thing I often say is programs are progress, but policy is power. And so when we talk about Web 3.0, it's an unregulated space. And people are cherishing that to some degree for market reasons. But at the same time, it's the new wave of states' rights. And we know that states' rights didn't work well for everyone. And so that's an area where policy, where we need strong advocates who can advocate for the policies to regulate that space in such a way where there's a higher level of equity.
It also gives you a unique opportunity to coalition build as well, because as we're seeing this rise of just outright violence, I say there's not much difference, but at least they're not wearing hoods against black folk. You're also seeing that rise of anti-Semitism, you're seeing that rise of Asian American hate, and so maybe there's a room or space there for some coalition building as well. With that, I just want to end by where I began, which is to simply tell this amazing panel who I love and adore those two very important words, which are thank you. And we'll turn it over to
Brilliant. Just a brilliant panel. We could stay here for another hour. You all have been fantastic. So 2 things I want to say. You'll be around to chat a bit, but this is just the beginning. I've gotten 6 texts since I've been sitting over there about thank you, and let's talk about next year. One person said, I want to help sponsor next year. So I just have my own view of where this can go in terms of what you all can do to get some slides up, some how-tos, some great examples. So if you all are down, we're down at least 1, 2, 3 more years. Give them a wonderful hand. Great panel. Black Philanthropy, part 2 next year. We'll see you. Good idea. Great idea.